It's a quiet Tuesday night, not the kind of night where anything is supposed to happen. The kind of night where the biggest decision you've made in the last 3 hours is what to eat and whether to go to bed early. You're comfortable, you're home, and home, that one specific place in the entire world, is supposed to be where nothing can reach you. Then the knock comes, and something shifts inside you before you even move. Not because the sound is loud, not because you were expecting trouble, but because the knock has a weight to it that regular knocks don't have. 3 strikes. Deliberate, evenly spaced, the kind that doesn't apologize for itself. You walk to the door, you look through the peephole, 2 uniformed officers, standing on your porch like they've been there before and they plan to stay. One of them is already scanning the side of your house, slowly, methodically, the way someone does when they're not just visiting, they're observing. The other one is looking straight at the door, waiting, patient in the way that people are patient when they know time is on their side. Your stomach drops, and your brain starts doing that thing it does when it doesn't know which threat to process first. Is this about me? Did something happen nearby? Did someone call about something? Is this a mistake? Wrong address? Or did they come here specifically? And underneath all of those questions, quieter than the rest but louder in a different way, what do I do right now? Here's what almost every single person does in that moment. They open the door. All the way. No chain lock, no cracked opening, full swing, full exposure, full invitation, because it feels like the right thing to do. Because standing at your own front door with police outside and not opening it feels like the behavior of someone who has something to hide. And you don't have anything to hide. So you open it, and you say the most natural thing in the world, "Hey officers, what's going on?" And right there, before a single important word has been exchanged, before anyone has asked you anything, before the conversation has even properly begun, you've already made the mistake that determines everything about what happens next. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that's just being a decent person. Opening the door is common courtesy. What could possibly be wrong with that? That thought, that completely reasonable, completely human thought, is exactly why this moment is so dangerous. Because the mistake doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like cooperation. It feels like the behavior of an honest person. And the painful truth that most people never learn until they're sitting across from an attorney trying to undo something that can't be undone is this. Being cooperative and being legally protected are not automatically the same thing. And your front door is the exact place where those two things can separate in ways that follow you for a very long time. Let's start with what you actually have, because most people carry these rights around like something they half remember from a civics class without ever truly understanding what they mean in a real moment. The Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution gives your home, specifically your home, the highest level of protection from government intrusion that exists anywhere in American law. Courts have said it across decades of decisions. The physical entry of someone's home by the government is the central evil the Fourth Amendment was designed to prevent. Not a secondary concern, not a technicality, the central evil. That's the language courts have used, and they meant it. What that translates to practically is this. Officers cannot legally enter your home without one of 3 things: a valid search warrant signed by a judge, a genuine emergency, or your consent. Now sit with that third one for a second. Your consent. Something you control entirely, something that cannot be taken from you, only given. And yet it is the one that gets handed over, casually, unknowingly, more than any other. Because consent doesn't look the way people think it looks. It doesn't look like signing a document. It doesn't look like a formal agreement with witnesses. It looks like stepping aside. It looks like saying, "Come on in," as a social reflex. It looks like walking back into your own house while asking a question, with officers following 2 steps behind before you've consciously agreed to anything. Courts look at everything when they evaluate consent. Your body language, your tone, whether you hesitated, whether you asked any questions, whether you made any movement that could be interpreted as an invitation. And here's the brutal part. The evaluation happens later, in a courtroom, long after the moment is gone and you can't go back to it. Now think about what opening that door fully actually does. The moment that door swings wide, your interior is visible. Your living room, your kitchen counter, whatever is sitting on your coffee table. Most of it is completely innocent, but you've just turned your home into something officers can scan, mentally map, and potentially use. There's a legal doctrine called plain view. It means that if officers are somewhere they're lawfully allowed to be, and they observe something that appears to be evidence of a crime, that observation can justify what comes next. Your open doorway puts everything behind you inside that doctrine's reach. You haven't consented to a search, but you've given them something almost as useful, a window into your private space that you can't close again once it's open. This is not theoretical. This is how real cases have been built from encounters that started with nothing more than a knock and a friendly question at the front door. And officers don't come to your door relying only on legal authority. They come with something else, something that in many ways is more powerful in the moment. They come with psychology. And understanding that psychology isn't about treating every officer like an adversary. It's about understanding the tools of the encounter so you can make real, informed decisions rather than reactive ones. The first thing you'll notice almost every time is that it doesn't feel heavy. That's the first thing that should make you pay attention. A warm opener, slightly apologetic tone. Sorry to bother you, just following up on something in the area. Or, this won't take long. The warmth isn't accidental, it's functional. It lowers your guard before you've had time to consider whether your guard should be lowered. And the moment you start operating inside the frame of, this is casual, this is no big deal, I'll just chat for a second, the encounter has already shifted in a direction you didn't consciously choose. Watch the physical space too, because the body communicates things the voice doesn't say out loud. As the conversation starts, there's sometimes a small forward shift, a slight lean, a half step toward the threshold while still mid-sentence about something that sounds harmless. It happens fast, and it happens while your attention is on the content of what's being said, rather than on what's happening spatially. What it does is test the boundary, gently, almost imperceptibly. If you don't respond to it, if you don't hold your position, the physical reality of the encounter starts to quietly reorganize itself. There's another move that works more often than it should, and it's built on the assumption of access. Instead of asking, "May we come in?" which gives you a clear choice, an officer might say, "Let's step inside where we can talk more easily." Notice what that does. It doesn't ask, it assumes. And because you're already in a socially charged moment where saying no feels loaded with implication, you might find yourself moving toward your own living room before you've actually said yes to anything. Then there's the pressure framing, some version of, look, we can make this simple or we can make it complicated. If we have to get a warrant, this becomes a much bigger deal. The implication is that the warrant is essentially inevitable, and your only real decision is about the difficulty of the road ahead. What that framing doesn't mention, what it very deliberately doesn't mention, is that warrants require probable cause established to a judge's satisfaction. They're not guaranteed. Sometimes the warrant statement is accurate, sometimes it's pressure, and knowing it can be pressure means you don't have to let it override your judgment. And then there's the question spiral. It starts somewhere harmless and it moves. Do you know the family across the street? You answer. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? You answer. Were you home last Thursday evening? And by the time you realize what's happening, you've been in an informal interview for 12 minutes, providing context and information and placing yourself in relation to something you still don't fully understand, all while the encounter has felt like nothing more than neighborly conversation. Every one of these things has a purpose. Every one of them is a tool. And understanding that isn't about going to your door with hostility. It's about going with awareness. Those are completely different things. So what do you actually do? Because everything up to this point has been preparation, and preparation without action is just anxiety with more information attached to it. Before you touch that door handle, remember that you have options you may never have considered. You can speak through a closed door. You can open it with a chain lock engaged. You can hold the door partially and keep your body in the frame. None of these things are rude. None of them are illegal. None of them give any reasonable officer cause for concern. They are simply the choices of someone who is being careful in their own home. And careful is not a crime. The first thing out of your mouth should be calm and it should be direct. Not aggressive, not apologetic, just clear. Good evening, officer. Do you have a warrant? That's the opener. It's respectful. It uses their title. It doesn't assume anything hostile about the encounter, and it immediately places the conversation on legal ground where you actually know what you're dealing with. If they say yes, ask to see it. You are entitled to examine that document. A valid warrant has a judge's signature, a specific date, and it tells you exactly what location is being searched and what is being looked for. Hold it to the window, pass it through a cracked door, read it, breathe. Now you know the shape of what you're facing, and you can respond to what's actually happening rather than to uncertainty. If they say no, which is the case in the overwhelming majority of doorstep visits, you now have the most important piece of information this encounter has to offer. And you follow with something like this, in a voice that has no heat in it. I'm happy to cooperate, but I don't consent to any searches, and I'd prefer to speak with an attorney before answering questions. Is there something specific I can help you with through the door? Take a moment with that. Really look at what it does. You've expressed willingness to cooperate. The encounter doesn't feel hostile from your side. You've clearly declined. Consent to searches. Your Fourth Amendment position is now unambiguous. You've invoked your preference to speak with an attorney, which is significant regardless of whether you're technically under arrest or investigation. And you've left the conversation open to addressing whatever their stated concern actually is. You haven't slammed a door in anyone's face. You've opened a specific, protected channel of communication. Stay behind your threshold. If the door opens at all, your feet stay inside. Inside your home, you have the strongest constitutional protections that exist anywhere in this legal system. On your porch, depending on circumstances and jurisdiction, that ground shifts. On the sidewalk, it shifts further. The threshold is not just physical, it's legal, and you want to be on the right side of it. Now, there's going to be a moment in some of these encounters, not all of them, but some, where you feel the pressure building inside your chest, or you start to feel like you're being treated unfairly, or talked to in a way that doesn't feel right. And the emotional response that wants to come out of your mouth is something like, I know my rights, you can't just... And here's the thing about that impulse. It's understandable, completely understandable. But the moment you go emotional, the encounter shifts. Your agitation becomes part of the record, even if it's completely justified. Your frustration can be characterized in ways that don't serve you. And suddenly the narrative around this interaction has texture it didn't have before. The answer isn't to be a robot. The answer is to have the words already built before the pressure arrives. Because when you know what to say, when the phrases are already sitting in your mind waiting, you don't have to construct your response while your hands are shaking. You reach for what's already there. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just uncomfortable, and I'd like to speak with an attorney before we continue. Say it quietly. Say it like you believe it, because you should. That sentence humanizes you, protects you legally, and creates a pause in the momentum without creating a confrontation. There's one more phrase that belongs permanently in your back pocket, and it's this. Am I being detained, or am I free to go? 5 words that cut through ambiguity better than almost anything else you can say. They force the encounter into one of 2 legal categories. Either you're being detained, which triggers specific rules and requirements, or you're not, which means the encounter is voluntary and you have the right to end it. Either answer gives you information. Ask it calmly, without a challenge in your voice, and listen to what comes back. Now let's put this under real pressure, because controlled scenarios are easy. Real situations are complicated. What if there are 2 officers and one has walked around the side of your house while the other holds your attention at the front door? This happens. Officers conducting a knock and talk have certain latitude regarding the areas immediately surrounding your home, but there are limits to where they can go and what they can observe. If you notice this, if something in your peripheral awareness tells you the engagement at the front door is partly keeping your attention occupied, note it. Don't react to it loudly. Don't create a confrontation. Just document it in your mind. If this encounter becomes something larger, the question of where officers were and what they were doing while the conversation was happening at the door can be legally relevant. What if the knock comes at 2 in the morning? Everything we've talked about applies, but the circumstances make it harder. You're half asleep, your judgment is slower, your emotional response is faster. The gap between impulse and considered action is narrower than it is at 7 in the evening when you're fully awake. This is exactly why, "Officer, I was asleep. Give me just a moment," is completely legitimate. Take the moment. Splash water on your face if you need to. Come to the door awake and aware rather than reactive. No reasonable officer acting in good faith will find that objectionable. And those 30 seconds of clarity might be the 30 seconds that matter most. What if they tell you someone inside might be in danger? This is the hardest pressure point because it takes your most protective instinct, your care for the people you love, and turns it into a lever. We received a call that someone inside might need help. If you have full knowledge of who is in your home and you know everyone is safe, you can address this calmly and directly through the door. I can confirm everyone here is safe and accounted for. Is there a specific concern I can help you address? You've responded to the stated emergency. You've provided information, and you've done it without swinging the door open and converting the encounter into something entirely different. If there is a genuine emergency inside your home, if something is actually wrong, you'll know it better than anyone standing on your porch. Act on what's real, but don't let manufactured urgency override your judgment when the facts you're standing in don't support it. What if officers say they're coming in regardless, warrant or not? This is the moment where one thing becomes completely non-negotiable. You do not physically resist, not ever, not under any circumstances. The legal consequences of physical resistance are severe, the safety risks are real, and nothing in this conversation is ever suggesting that you put yourself in physical conflict with law enforcement. What you do, once and calmly, is say, "I am not consenting to this entry or any search. I want to speak with an attorney." One time, quietly. Then you observe. You mentally document everything you can. What time it is, what was said, what the officers' names and badge numbers are, which you have the right to request. You are building a record for the conversation that happens later, in a different room, with an attorney beside you. What if you're renting and your landlord let officers inside without your knowledge or consent? More renters face this than realize it's even a legal question. Generally speaking, a landlord cannot consent to a police search of your living space on your behalf. The Fourth Amendment protections attach to you as the tenant, to the person whose home this actually is, not to the person who owns the building. Your home is your home even when someone else owns the walls. This is jurisdiction specific and legally complex, which is exactly why having an attorney's contact information saved in your phone before you ever need it isn't paranoid, it's practical. Get the number before the knock comes. What if there's a camera on your door, a doorbell camera, a security system, and the encounter is already being recorded? Use it. Let it run. Don't reference it like a threat, and don't make it the centerpiece of the conversation. A camera present and running is simply documentation, a time-stamped, objective record of what was said and how. It protects everyone. It speaks for itself. The more calmly and clearly you conduct yourself during the recorded encounter, the more useful that footage becomes if this ever needs to be reviewed. What if your neighbors are watching from their porches? What if there's an audience for what's happening at your door, and part of your brain is calculating how this looks? Recognize that for what it is: social pressure that has absolutely no bearing on your legal rights or the correct decisions in this moment. Your neighbors don't know the context. They're not responsible for your protection. And any neighbor worth having is not going to think worse of you for calmly and politely conducting yourself in a legally protected way at your own front door. The audience is irrelevant. The encounter is what matters. And the hardest what if of all: what if you're in a complicated situation? What if something happened, or something in your household creates exposure you're aware of, and these officers showing up isn't entirely a surprise, even if you were hoping it wouldn't come? Here's the most honest thing I can say to you. If your situation has legal complexity, the doorstep is the worst possible place to try to manage it through conversation. Every unrehearsed statement, every attempt to explain, every defensive clarification is on the record the second it leaves your mouth. The same framework, decline consent, invoke counsel, say nothing of legal significance, applies more urgently in that scenario, not less. Not because these protections are tools for hiding guilt, because they exist precisely for the moments when the stakes are highest and the pressure is greatest. They are there for the people who need them most. Now let's bring this all the way home, because here's what I need you to actually carry out of this. Your home has real, powerful, constitutionally grounded protection, but that protection is not self-enforcing. It doesn't activate automatically. It requires you to know it exists, to recognize the moment that calls for it, and to exercise it calmly and clearly when that moment arrives. The front door is where it either holds or it doesn't, and it holds based on decisions made in the first 30 seconds, when your heart is pounding, when the social pressure is at its peak, when every instinct you have is telling you to just be cooperative and make this go away. Before you touch the handle, look first. Always. Confirm who is there before you do anything else. When you open it, don't open it all the way. Not yet. The chain lock exists. Use it. The first thing you ask, do you have a warrant? Not because you're being difficult, because it's the most important piece of information in the encounter, and you're entitled to know it. If there's no warrant, you express willingness to cooperate, you clearly decline to consent to searches, and you express your preference to speak with an attorney before answering questions. Calm, measured, no heat. If pressure builds, you have the words already. I'm not trying to be difficult, I'm just uncomfortable, and I'd like to speak with an attorney before we continue. Reach for them, they're already there. If you're unsure whether you're free to leave the encounter, am I being detained or am I free to go? 5 words. Ask them once, quietly. If officers enter regardless, you don't resist physically, ever. You state your non-consent once, clearly, and then you document everything and contact legal help as fast as you possibly can. There's something worth saying plainly before we're done, because this whole conversation could leave someone with the impression that officers are adversaries to be defeated at the front door. That's not what this is. Most officers doing this work are doing it in good faith. Most encounters at the front door don't end in disaster. Most of the time, a calm, clear, legally protected conversation results in officers leaving, life continuing, and nothing more significant than a slightly elevated heart rate that fades by the time you've made yourself a drink. But most of the time is not a legal defense, and "I didn't know I could say no" has never protected anyone in a courtroom after the fact. The people who drafted the Fourth Amendment didn't write it for attorneys and judges. They wrote it for the person standing at their own door, in their own home, trying to figure out what to do in a moment that feels bigger than they were prepared for. They wrote it because they understood something that still holds true: that power naturally expands into whatever space it's given, and that clear limits, clearly held, calmly asserted, are the only thing that keeps that expansion in check. You've just spent time understanding something that most people figure out far too late. You understand what the door actually means legally. You understand the psychology of the encounter. You know what to say, how to say it, and why it matters that you say it calmly. You've thought through the branches, the late night knock, the split officers, the emergency claim, the pressure framing, and you've given yourself a response to each one that doesn't require you to think on your feet in the worst possible moment. The knock is coming someday. You don't control when. You don't control why. Maybe it's a genuine misunderstanding. Maybe it's a neighborhood inquiry where your address got flagged by mistake. Maybe it's something more serious. You'll find out what it is when it happens. What you can control is what you do in those first 30 seconds. And now you know what to do. But here's the thing that's been quietly sitting at the back of your mind through all of this. The question this whole conversation has been circling without answering yet. What happens after? What happens when the door isn't where this ends? When officers come inside? When a warrant gets executed? When you come home and find your front door already open and your life on the other side of it already changed? What are your rights then? What do you say? What do you absolutely not do? Because most people think if they survive the front door, the hard part is behind them. And that's true, until it isn't.